If I start, I'm gonna have another little rant. So I probably shouldn't, I don't know. Oh, I'll go ahead and I'll give you a little rant. Um,
Rant away.
so, you know, I was hoping that I could understand Hegel more. And I think if I have been reading some of these secondary sources that you guys are looking at, maybe I would have a better grasp. But what I'm experiencing with reading this is I lost track of whatever argument he may have had a long time ago. And so I don't uh, experience this as an argument supporting any kind of conclusion or anything like that. Maybe that's a narrow-minded way of thinking about what he's doing, a narrow-minded traditional sort of way. But the problem is if I don't understand his argument, I don't know whether I should take him seriously or not. And so, if I like, for example, Kant, when I read like Grounding for Metaphysics of Morals, it took me a long time, but I was able to work through his argument. I kind of see what he's doing. I see what his suppositions and his premises are. I see why he draws the conclusions that he does. And then I can say, well, I don't agree with this or I don't agree with that. But in the case of Hegel, I don't understand what he's doing. I don't understand what he's after. I don't know what kind of argument he's trying to deploy. I don't understand, I guess maybe I don't understand dialectical reasoning. I see him saying, well, you've got this, and then it interacts with this opposite of some kind. I don't know where that opposite came from. I don't know if it's a reflection of the original one. I don't know, but he says you got this and then you got this opposite and they do this thing and now you have this other thing and it's opposite and they do something and I don't know, I don't have any sense of why that's happening. Why is this dialectical process happening? And why is this other thing that emerges from this interaction? Why is that emerging? I don't know. I don't get it. And then I don't understand a lot of his basic terms. Like I still don't really understand what universal means for him, or what essence means, or what negative means. I don't really understand how dialectic works. And so what the reason it's important, I think, some people have said, well, don't worry about trying to understand it so much. But the problem is if I don't understand it, I don't know whether to take it seriously or not. Because then what happens is on those occasions when I actually understand what he's saying, I don't know, again, why should I believe that? Because I don't know where it came from, And so it feels like he's making dogmatic statements. This is the way it is, this is the way it is, and this is the way it is. And I doubt if that's the case. I suspect this process is supposed to make these things kind of evident to me as to why. But again, I lost the thread, I don't know, 100 pages or more ago. And so what I again experience is just these kind of statements that feel like they're just dogmatic pronouncements. And I don't understand why I should take them seriously, much less believe them. And someone might say, well, do they resonate with you? No, some do and some don't, but I don't know that resonating with me is a great test for whether I should take them seriously or not. Because for example, one thing that resonates with me right now is assassinating Donald Trump. But I don't know that because that idea resonates with me, that that's something I should embrace. And Hegel himself, this is on page 224, section 390, toward the bottom of the page, he's talking about, this battle between virtue and the way of the world. And in the middle, he says, those kinds of ideal essences and purposes all slip away from sight, since they are only empty words which elevate the heart, but leave reason empty. And so, I've got the sense that some people are like, well, you should just feel it, and you should just, do you resonate with it? Does it sync with you? And I'm like, yeah, but even Hegel himself says that's not a great criterion for judging this stuff, because that can lead you into this sort of empty words where things don't have any meaning anymore. And so that's just the general. I mean, there are passages in here where I thought I understood him well enough to find them interesting and worth thinking about, especially toward the end when he's talking about virtue and that kind of stuff. But again, even those things, they just seem to for me, they just kind of like come out of this vacuum. Dogmatic statements. This is what virtue is, and this is what that is, and here's how they fight together, and here's what the good is, and here's what that is. And I'm like, okay, I guess. But again, and maybe it's again because I'm utterly failing to grasp, I guess, how dialectic works and why these poles come into interaction and where they come from and why the thing that emerges from their interaction, why does that emerge as the result of their interaction? I mean, maybe if I understood that whole process, then I would see why he thinks these ideas are legitimate and worth taking seriously. But so that's just a general, I don't know if it's a criticism, it's just sort of a general, state of frustration. And then people say, well, that frustration's good. And I'm like, but I don't see that it's productive. It just leaves me in the state of reading stuff and going, he says that, Donald Trump says this other shit, why should I believe one? Why should I believe the other? Because I don't really understand where either one of them got their stuff from. So there's my weekly whine. Wah, wah, wah.
I just wanted to jump in and say, I think like the transitions I feel like those are the parts where I kind of like, every time he transitions to like the next shape, I kind of am wondering like, how did we get from necessity to law of the heart? Like, I don't understand how like heart is connected to necessity, how the law of the heart is supposed to be like this unity between like pleasure and necessity. But I feel like I do, like I'm getting a grasp of like how the stages almost stand in themselves and like go through their own movement. And I feel like that's definitely aided through the secondary sources, because like lots of times I'm reading this and I'm just kind of like, the way I've been reading is I read my secondary source, and he has section by section little commentaries, and I'll read that first, and then I read Hegel, which, yeah, I mean, I'm reading this stuff in Hegel and thinking like, there is no way I would have any clue what's going on without the secondary source. And I mean, like, I feel I've done the whole traumatize yourself with the book without reading any secondaries and then like trying to like recollect after. And I'm kind of just feeling like, I don't think I'm ever going to have time in my life to like return to books after like traumatizing myself and like reading secondary sources and then returning to read them again. I feel like I just find it more entertaining, more worthwhile to just read a secondary source along with the book and get an interpretation of it and be able to bounce that off of people in the future. But with that said, like, yeah, I feel like I would be so lost. Like the language he's using, and like even like because Kalkavage in the Logic of Desire, he kind of like ties it to like historical examples. Can we follow a similar path? Yeah. But yeah, he ties it to like historical examples as well as like literary examples. And he just like tries to talk about it in what to me feels like much more ordinary language. Whereas it like, I feel like Hegel's in the, just like, it feels like much more like abstract, technical, logical. And being able to kind of just like have this parallel story going on in my head while I'm reading Hegel, it's been like such an immense aid. But I like, so I thought, interestingly, like, because you said you like lost the train of thought, or you lost the thread pages back. I felt that way at one point. I think when we like first got into Reason, and I was kind of nervous, like, I'm like, is the book over for me? Like, am I just in this realm of Schelling, where like Schelling got to the point where I had no clue what to think, where it was going, where the thread was. But I feel like, interestingly, with Hegel, it feels like every shape is like repeating previous shapes like within it, and that has been like it's just like a light, because I feel like he's like doing the same thing over and over and over with like different shapes, and I feel like maybe that's kind of like getting the hang of his method, and that gives me like a little bit of hope that like it doesn't matter if I don't understand like a particular shape, but just like familiarizing yourself with like, I guess you would say, the dialectic, and like how he kind of like shows each shape coming into contradiction with itself. And then like you get to re-experience previous shapes like in the later shapes is what it feels like. Um, I feel like I had a rough, aided by the secondary sort of this. Um, and so we read the 3 sections, A, B, and C. And I just wanted to like throw out Calcavage's little like parallel story in an attempt at like a short and sweet um, thread that maybe other people can bounce their understandings off of, whether or not they're reading it with Calcavage or not. But in the first section, pleasure and necessity, Calcavage says is like, this is like the romantic, maybe exemplified as Faust, someone who like turns away from like science and logic. And you could say like, the ethics of society, and turns towards like living in this like romantic union with another. So they're living for like just their pleasure, which can be like they're trying to like recognize themselves in unity with another. And he gives Faust as an example, because he like gives up the scientific rational life and just like falls in love and lives according to his passion, and like tries to like actualize himself through this bond with one other person. um, and then I think necessity comes into play there, because he recognizes in doing that he creates like disaster for another person. And it's like, so it kind of ends in disaster. And then that like pushes someone into law of the heart, which I was reading as like the person who's trying to actualize their own like connection with the universal, as opposed to like societies, or just like the general community, the like empty ethic that like the person first transgressed against. And this like they come to realize that everyone is doing this same thing, and that the empty universal of the community is like not really an empty universal, but like is a live universal of other people. And the contradiction here is they just begin to blame other people and say that like my law of the heart, my personal individuality, is being like, distorted by other people's law of the heart. And my impression was that like shifting into like this idea that like everyone's law of the heart is fighting against everyone else's, is how we get into like way of the world, where like everyone's just acting on their own self-interest to actualize themselves, as if like their heart is their connection to the universal. And then the way of the world becomes the new opposition by the person of virtue, who it's and for Calcavage, the person of virtue is like shit, I'm blanking now. Getting
I
ahead of
almost felt like
myself.
Kalkovage had a little bit of a Kojève attitude towards the person of virtue, that it was just a reflection of the societal or spirit of the times in a similar fashion. Did I read that on the same passion with you, or same wavelength?
Say again.
Like I felt like Kalkovich had a little bit of, and I don't know if I'm saying this name right, because I was saying Zizek's name wrong for the longest time. The Kojève kind of classic Hegelian interpretation, in that the customs of the nation correspond to the spirit of times, but only to the extent that they can be established to like um, it creates some type of symbiotic peace at that time, and they kind of adapt and change, so that customs and virtues really, even in the Hegelian system, almost have kind of an amoralist twist, and that it's being needed to be reinvented over time and time again, depending on the time period. um, And that's where it starts getting into the law of the heart. Like I think Kojève and Kalkovich have a very similar interpretation of this Hegelian system, even though rooted in idealism, kind of has almost a, you know, nihilist existentialist, if you want to argue that, a moralist condition of it being a construction of virtue at that time, and it's a continuous process.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't get the amoralist stuff or the connection to Kojève, but I mean, maybe when you say that, that makes me think of, because at least my impression was that Kojève just like emphasized the master-slave dialectic and tried to make Hegel all about like struggles, like I guess like political struggles. I don't know how true or not that is. I've just like heard that talked about a little bit, but and I see, like, to me, like I found comfort in Kalkovich because it seemed like he was like giving just like an easy interpretation along these lines of like how these few sections would apply, I guess, like more easily to like just this, like you could say like a relation from the individual to a society, which may kind of,
Sorry, I got
I
excited.
know you're good, go.
Okay, no. So, and that's what I was kind of wondering, because I really want to discuss this page on 206, which I couldn't find earlier, and I was really irritated about with myself. But on 206, it kind of leaves into this thing where he talks about reason and the unhappy void, which is on 206 in section 340 all the way towards 341, where he says that the intermediate position in the middle term, which it occupies, is an unhappy void, since what should fill and fill has been turned into a fixed extreme. Thus, in this final stage of reason, in its observational roles, it's worse, and that is why its reversal becomes a necessity. And it kind of leads into further sections down that we were reading, where it's almost like he's saying the basis for his ethics, the basis for his epistemology, the basis for everything is reason needs to have a self-reflection that not only exists for itself, but exists for another. When it exists just for itself, that's where I got into the idea of it being a desire for a heart. It sees itself with desire as this ultimate end. And it almost was like what he's saying is that there needs not only be this transcendence, but this form of a philosophy of like immanence plus transcendence, and that reason needs to exist for another in desire, but then also have kind of like this symbiotic relationship of engaging with a Hegelian type of immanence and transcendence, so it doesn't just turn into its own end for desire, which becomes all these conflicting ideas of society compounding on each other for wanting to have like these moral axioms that they feel is right and just. So it's almost like he's saying that it's leading, reason has to have a component of desire but not see it as an end, and it has to exist in such a way where it has kind of this integration of existing for itself, like the master slave existing for itself and existing for another, in tandem with the culture, as well as this kind of like epistemological system he seems to be constructing that'll produce an end that is reflective of spirit. Does that make sense? I don't even know if it makes sense. I'm talking too much.
If I could just, by the way, just to clarify for Nevitz, it's immanence and transcendence, right? There's the two sort of, not, he said, what is, in the chat, he said, what does immanence in transcendence mean?
And I meant
yeah,
and. No, not in. No,
not
no.
Yes, so you and I are on the same page.
Yeah, brain.
Well,
yeah,
it's fine.
ADHD, fun stuff.
To kind of merge the line of thinking that I think you're going with, and I think it's I want to respond to something that Nevitz said, kind of through this, because this whole section, I think, and it's also, Joey said is actually a very good way to think. This is kind of the problem. It seems like I think that's a thing. This is not a real problem, but a kind of fake problem about Hegel, is that there's just a lot of stuff that is going on and that can be said about it. And so I can point to like what everybody said and be like, that's actually a really good way to think about it. Why don't you just think about it like that, right? Like, like that makes sense. But like, they all are very different ways and thoughts and ideas, and they all somehow fit together into this thing. But to make my point, I wanted to respond to Nevitt when he asked, why dialectics, basically. Like, why dialectics? What is a gnat flying around my face? Why does a thing engage in this dialectical process? Where does the process come from? Why does it happen? And why does a new thing emerge? Why is this new thing here? What is it? And I have been thinking about an answer, and it ties in very much to the present chapter and what everything that Joseph just said about immanence and transcendence, which I think is like one of the central themes of this last section. So, why dialectics? My basic answer as to why there is a dialectical movement within Hegel's system, which is this is a weird thing about it, but it's something that I think it was in the Bernstein tapes. You ever heard of the Bernstein tapes? An old set of tapes that were like an academic resource of lectures by this professor who explained phenomenology of spirit. And I haven't listened to them in a very long time. But I listened to I went on a road trip to Dallas with my girlfriend, and I listened to like 6 in a row, and then I listened to another 6, like on the way there and then on the way back, and they were good. But I'd never read Hegel before ever, so I was like, "What could this be like? What could this guy put? This is like, what?" I just was I was blown away. I actually don't know if they're on YouTube. I think that's how that must be just how I watched them. Yeah. But anyway, in that he said this. He said that one of the most basic ways to think about why dialectics happens is self-identity. Is Hegel's, and even I actually read the same argument in Gadamer. Gadamer, he's a very traditional Hegelian theorist. He has a book called Hegel's Dialectic. It's on my desk right now. But the idea is that self-identity is Hegel's proof of the failure of the predicate. This is like a basic idea. This is what kind of sets everything in motion. When he says a phrase, "A rose is a rose," right? A rose is a rose. There is a problem for this statement as a self-identity of a rose is a rose. The statement in its enunciated character refers to the difference between a thing and itself. Yeah, I'll link the books that I've talked about. The failure of the predicative is the site of self-identity's failure to encapsulate itself. I'll give you an example. Boys will be boys. That's one. Or which means our sweet precious young boys, at the same time they will be rowdy. They will get, they'll get down and dirty from time to time. You know how they'll roughhouse. Or man is still a man. The humankind, the category of the creature, the apex predator of all of Earth, the greatest sort of suzerain of the earth, since the dinosaurs, is still a man, a particular stupid, weak man, like me. Like if I'm the poster boy for the entirety of man, we're in big trouble. and okay, and this is one that Zizek actually has referenced, where he said, if I'm at a dinner party with everybody and I say something sexist or disgusting, if it's horribly offensive, and then I leave to go to the bathroom, one of my friends might be tempted to say, oh, well, Slavoj is Slavoj, he's going to be like that. And it's same for me. It's, if I did that, it'd be like, oh, Hunter's Hunter. There's a distance between the first enunciation and the second enunciation on the basis of repetition itself. Just on its repetition, there is difference introduced. So a rose is a rose, a thing that's repeated that creates a difference. Self-identity is grounded in the failure of the predicate. So what that means is where there's one, there is always two, basically. If there's a rose, there's but you can think of it as like rose and rose prime, or man and man prime, or man one, or man whatever, what little superscript or subscript you want, I don't care. But where there's one, there's always two, which means that one is impossible. One is impossible because of this distance between a thing and itself. At least within the self-identity is the phrase self-identity, to have identity with myself, it would be to be one in a way, and that's impossible, I think. But this one and the other one, when it says a rose is a rose, that is a statement of self-identity. That is a statement of pure self-identity. But that statement of self-identity engages it. Here's actually my response to Chase. You said, how does that ground self-identity? How does this vary the predicate? This is an interpretation that I'm basing off of the Bernstein tape reference to self-identity as the problem, and Gadamer, who's more traditional, and then Zizek wrote this other part that I'm actually about to look. I have to read. I don't know off the top of my head, but this is what Zizek says about this. This is where it gets weird. This is the negative philosophy part, actually. Also, Chase, I think so, but I don't know. He says that this one being impossible is not where it stops. I think the negative reading of Hegel would say that the second, the two, the rose is still a rose. The second rose, basically, is a void that marks the impossibility, basically, of rose to stand by itself and not have a distance between itself and itself, to not be cracked or split, bifurcated, split down the middle, into this duality of itself and itself, caused by the failure of the predicate. So yeah, we're using tandem to do it. Oh, okay. So in a way, dialectical opposition, and this part is Zizek's words. This is Zizek's words. The second element fills in a void of incompleteness of the first term. And what that means is hard for even me to really totally get, to be honest. That's weird. But what I get is that at least it's a marker of this internal difference. I don't get the filling in a void yet. I really don't get the whole it fills in a void or whatever, totally. But I get the fact that it's like a marker of internal difference. And this dialectical process kind of produces, or well, not the dialectical process, but this difference, this split between the two terms, right? Then produces a third term through the difference between the two terms. But like what we're talking about right now, the split between a thing and itself produced me talking about it right now. In a way, I'm sublating the present difference into its concept of itself, and enunciating it, basically. And my being for itself in its universality is see, okay, it's not easy. There's no, I can't even do it. I can't even, but I will eventually if I read this enough times. But my basic idea is as to why this third thing, this or like a supporting point to this move of the internal difference and then the difference itself kind of coming out as this new term. I don't see this points to any problem with this particular. Wait here, I'm going to read. Hold on. When someone says a boy is a boy, this means this particular boy is acting according to our normal expectations of how boys typically act. A boy is a boy. This means this particular boy is acting according to our normal expectation of how boys typically act. I don't see why this points to any problem with it. A boy is a boy. Oh, okay. Instead of like boys will be boys, you could say like a boy is a boy.
Well, I think boys will be boys is exactly the same. It's like when you say boys will be boys, all that means is boys act the way we expect boys typically to act. And I don't see why there's any failure in identity there. You're just, I mean, it's a completely sensible statement. You know, when you see a boy do something, you're like, well, you know, he's a boy. I mean, that's the way boys act. Boys will be boys. And I don't see how that predication points to any fundamental metaphysical problem of identity.
I think that on okay. In a couple senses. The first thing I think is that in kind of locating the fundamental metaphysical problems of identity or of existence or whatever, right? I think that to kind of try to identify where I think Hegel stands in terms of like his ontology in a way, is that I think he was a big fan of Kant, and I think that he took Kant's epistemology and kind of turned it into an ontology. I think that Hegel tries to kind of bring Kant's, like the antinomies of reason. Okay, for example, the antinomies of reason. This will hopefully this will make a little bit more sense, because if you know a little bit about Kant, Kant's antinomies of reason is a part of an epistemological problem for him. He says that there's this epistemological phenomena within the experience of being a human that is antinomies of reason, where there's this limit, there's this incompleteness, right? But I think that Hegel, in a way, tries to bring these epistemological antinomies into ontology, and thus kind of try to undermine all self-consistent ontology. You know, I mean, this whole chapter we've been talking about invertedness all back and forth. You know, there's a lot of appearance of invertedness and undermining and frustrating, collapsing, breaking down. And I think it's not all, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm so paranoiac with like a conspiracy theory about what Hegel's trying to tell me, but I think that it kind of centers around this concept of Kant's antinomies are a part of reality, such that reality itself, in a way, is like this non-all, this thing that suffers from an inability or orgiastic representation. I don't know what that is, but it sounds pretty cool. But the why is it a problem to say a boy is a boy? I think that one way to think of the problem without, I'm trying to not get into the, okay. Another way to think of that split between like a boy is a boy typically acts in the way that I assume a boy to act or whatever, is that it's the separation between content and form, in a way. It's the separation between content and form, where form, and I actually do have, really old notes about this, actually, I'm going to flip to.
Before you do that, so when you say content and form, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but I mean, and this is partially prompted by a comment Chase made. I mean, it sounds like a particular universal kind of a problem, like the particular fails to conform to the universal, you know? So you say, well, all boys are this, you know, when you see a boy as a boy, the first case is a specific boy, the second case is a type. And so I mean, it seems to me that statement's just saying this specific individual conforms to the type boy. you know, to put it in philosophical language, that seems to be what that statement says, or boys will be boys. Boys will act according to their type or according to their universal essence or something.
Yes.
And so is this problem with identity you're pointing to related to some problem with the individual to conform to the universal?
Well, I think that it goes to the, I think that it goes kind of to the end in a way, that it's not just necessarily that it's like the it's any sort of symbolic category, any minimally consistent symbolic enunciation of boy. This is like getting into Nietzsche. This is like like where Nietzsche is kind of on the ball, is like it's just a series of patterns and colors and phenomena that we are, you know, generalizing. But Hegel tries to apply sort of a logic to that, which is the thing's failure to be its symbolic container or category. And in a way, the statement boys, this is like, seriously, as far as Hegel is concerned, the statement this boy will behave in a way similar to other boys is a totally fundamentally absolutely different statement than this boy is a boy, in a way. You know what I mean? Like because of the statement is a boy versus will most likely fit into the category of boy based on a series of pre-given elements or criteria which will be quantified or measured in some way. And I think that statement is a boy. It at the very least, it points to our failure to enunciate anything like self-identity. And then it brings into question what our concept is, apart from the enunciated concept or within the enunciated concept. And that gets into really weird stuff. But my point is, a good way to, okay, another thought that I thought would be important to get across so that I can stop talking. I'm just kidding. I had a thought about today's reading that made it make sense to me. Made it at least kind of slide into like a starting position where I could like get the ball rolling from there, from the beginning of the reading. It really helped me. And it was that and other people might actually disagree with this, but it felt very much to me like at the beginning of Pleasure and Necessity, where we started the reading that we had for today. It was like Hegel was saying, okay, let's kind of you know, focus up from the top, refresh ourselves. What's going on? Let's start from cogito ergo sum, basically. Let's pretty much start from where consciousness says that it has itself as a reality. That's all he's saying at the beginning. He's like, the consciousness, let's imagine a scenario where a consciousness has itself as a reality. And that is pretty much like Descartes saying cogito ergo sum. I have myself as a reality. I think, therefore I am. I am. Maybe not actually even as far as I think, therefore I am. Maybe just I am. But it has its consciousness has itself, or self-consciousness has itself as a reality only for itself. And then the problem that it runs into is that for its self to be a reality, for its certainty to be elevated to truth, it needs the support of actuality. And in order to be actual, to be guaranteed, basically, to guarantee that I exist, when I think cogito ergo sum, to be certain that that's the case, I need one other person to vouch for me, to be like, yes, that is the case. I need an outside perspective. I need somebody to confirm what's going on. I am alone. I need one other person for Hegel. And the problem is actual otherness, which means that I run into the gap of absolute distance between myself and another person, and the total absolute inability for me to be like immediately certain that somebody else exists. So I start from I think therefore I am. Then I think I want to know that I am. I think that I am. I think therefore I think I am, but I think therefore I am, and I think that I want to know that I think therefore I am. And so I need another person to be like, yeah, you are thinking and you are. Because by myself, I can't elevate my certainty into truth.
So it requires this kind of extrinsic relation outside of itself to justify itself.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, it has to go from this kind of interiority of just the pure subject, the pure I, and actually become an object for some other. And in doing that, there's a paradox there, and that how can self-consciousness be something? How can I? Okay, you've got this. Just go with this, like a kind of split between this, the back of the mind. There's this pure subject, and it can't be, objectified into anything. It always escapes that. And then, well, what is the subject conscious of? It has to be conscious of something, Those are these objects, but those objects aren't the subjectivity of consciousness. So you can't actually have consciousness be conscious of consciousness, because then it would just becomes an object, and that's not consciousness. Consciousness is always what is conscious of the object. So that's that kind of paradox of self-consciousness that I think is kind of at the root there. And also I think that's kind of, you could kind of make similar kind of extrapolations about that with the subject predicate form, although that one's a little different, so I'm not sure if they totally correspond. But does that sound like something that's kind of what's going on with this like split in the self, and this whole idea of how we need like a mutual recognition through the other and whatnot? I think that's what Hegel's getting at for the most part.
So I think why Hegel spends so much time talking about consciousness is to establish, and this is kind of what Joey was talking about, establish a foundational framework from which to argue that what he's describing as the phenomena of self-consciousness, which and we're barely really this is these rules of needing another self-consciousness, right? Like this is an example, like I need another self-consciousness to feel good and to do my thing, to live. That is true for self-consciousness, both in the logic of itself and in the experience. And I think that's a big thing. Hegel is trying to talk in this dual speak way about the logic and the experience. And in this space, why does he talk about like consciousness so much? I think that he wants to be able to say these things that come across as dogmatic, like the good appears as gifts, particular gifts and abilities, and then those gifts are regarded as misused, and like these kind of crazy like big statements about how things work. I think they come from that
What part of that question that I posed to Chase was because, he was saying self-consciousness is necessarily, or maybe Chase said consciousness is necessarily self-aware in some sense. And, you have, I think that's the Kantian, oh, he didn't mean that. Kantian apperception. So Chase, what did you mean then?
Basically that self-consciousness is a problematic concept because for consciousness to be conscious of itself, it has to be structurally like an object, because that's what consciousness is conscious of. So in order for, I'll use my hands here. So you got consciousness as this thing behind your head, I'm trying to look at that. How do I look at the thing that's looking? I can only look at something as an object. And in doing that, it can't be a perfect self-consciousness. It always has to be an objectified form of consciousness, which is exactly what consciousness is not in its pure form, at least. So,
but see, that's exactly what, and I think that's exactly why Kant begins with, I think from the very beginning with self-consciousness, so that, Kant from the very beginning asserts that, I think that consciousness, to speak meaningfully of consciousness, consciousness has to have some sense of its at least being there, even if it's not fully objectified. So, you have this, the apperception of the unity of self-consciousness, and, and this sort of apperception. And the phenomenologists start with that as well, from what I can tell, like Husserl, and, maybe because he's borrowing from Kant, but they seem to start from the very beginning with self-consciousness, or at least a consciousness that has some sense of its own being there. But Hegel spends so much time earlier in the book talking about consciousness before he ever gets to self-consciousness. And so I'm wondering, if what is he, again, this is one of those questions. I don't know what he means by consciousness, but he's talking about consciousness for a long time prior to ever bringing up self-consciousness. And then he brings self-consciousness, and that's when he starts talking about this, stuff you guys are talking about, that you don't have a sense of self unless you have a sense of other, and that sort of thing, which that all makes sense to me. But I don't understand why is he talking about consciousness in this general way prior to the idea of self-consciousness ever arising. I don't understand what he's doing there, or what he means by consciousness there.
So, yeah, I think that is something, okay, phenomenology is letting the appearances speak for themselves. And I think he's taking consciousness in that kind of naive sense as it's inherently a kind of truth claim, a claim to certainty. So that's where he starts with is sense certainty, and consciousness is always about some kind of an object. It's some kind of certainty about an object where you're conceiving of something, I'm not totally sure, some object as some kind of a truth, just not so much explicitly, I think, but something implicit within that. That seems to be what he starts with as consciousness. So I think that would probably be my best guess. But some of these things that he does, I've realized he does these things where he needs the thing like consciousness or self-consciousness in order to show how it's constituted. The master-slave dialectic thing, he's talking about, oh yeah, there's this one self-consciousness, and then there's this other self-consciousness, but they need the other self-consciousness in order to be self-consciousness. And it's like, what? Wait, hold on. So it needs two to be itself originally self-consciousness. Like, do you see that's it doesn't work? Or am I just not understanding correct? Or I'm not sure, but it seems like he does that all the time. It's just like, okay, you need this consciousness, but this consciousness breaks down and encounters the other consciousness, and therefore we get consciousness. Like, wait, what? You explained consciousness with consciousness. How did you? What the hell? So I don't know. That's obviously a kind of parody of his argument, but I'm kind of stumped on some of that stuff too. Exactly how he does that. Yeah.
I feel like I just in regards to like Nevitt's last comment, I feel like I recall like in the Bernstein lectures, him saying something along the lines of like he starts at these phases that kind of like presuppose all like the problems of the stages to come, and we naturally fall into the further stages after recognizing that the earlier stages are problematic and we can't like find certainty in them. So like for me that makes sense of why we would start in consciousness and then like work our way towards self-consciousness after recognizing that like sense certainty doesn't make sense without being able to like unfold and develop these later stages.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense in a way, but I don't. I mean, I don't really understand. I'm sorry for dragging us all the way back to the beginning like this, but I don't understand how, for example, sense certainty, where he starts off, how that can even mean anything. How you can talk about consciousness and self certainty? How does that even mean anything prior to having prior to talking about self consciousness? I mean, what is self certainty in consciousness if there is no self consciousness? I don't get it. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I feel like that's like what he was saying in a way. Like he's saying that we think these things are given. We think that like, you know, I can pick up a book and say this is a book, and that's like the given. And I think he wants to argue that like in trying to do this, we realize like, oh shit, like what are the presuppositions for me to be able to pick this up and say it's a book? And so we go from like sense certainty into perception. And so it's like it keeps unfolding into like, oh, well, for this to be true, then I have to back up to perception. And then it's like, oh, I have to back up to understanding. Oh, I have to back up to self-consciousness in all those stages. So I feel like he's saying that like, yeah, you're right, that this doesn't make sense to pick up and say it as a given. And I guess that's, to me, like that plugs into his idea of like nothing's like immediate, but it has to go through this process of like thought. And I guess that's like refers to just the development of these stages of consciousness, that they're all necessary for us to ultimately be able to pick up a book and say, this is a book.
Can I was really struck by your question, Nevitt, and you know, so what is sense certainty without self-consciousness? And when Joey and other of you were talking, for some reason, I was thinking of, well, don't think of human beings for a second. Think of other mammals. And I'm thinking, you know, I know my dog, and I'm not being sarcastic, my dog senses things. My dog can recognize things, but I don't know. I wouldn't say my dog has a self-consciousness in a sense the way we would, or I wouldn't want to be totally blank and say he doesn't have self-consciousness, but I'm not sure how much self-consciousness has to exist for a certain amount of sense of things to exist.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think that is what he's getting at. Well, I think, Joey, your description, I think, was really good. But yeah, at the very beginning, he's starting with something that, so if I recall, I believe he does say something about self-consciousness is kind of always implicit in consciousness, but it's just not explicit in these early stages until it emerges with, you know, self-consciousness. But yeah, that idea of there's an animal, you know, you just got your good old mammal. It knows, or at least it thinks without explicitly positing in this kind of, you know, discursive manner that that food right there is real. It's certain of that. It's certain because it senses it. And I think that's kind of what he's getting at, because he mentions animals in that opening section as well. And that's what the first stage of desire also mentions, that kind of animal desire. It isn't until later you get a truly kind of human desire that kind of does something a little different, that's not purely consumptive. But I think the way that kind of basic certainty of particular sensory objects in the animal's environment, the way that it does that, that's kind of what he's trying to get at as this kind of basic assumption of the starting place. But then in trying to actually explicate that, especially in a way that, you know, he says at the beginning that, well, truth has to be something universal. It has to be something you can write down. You know, if I write down that it is nighttime, that will not be true anymore when it's daytime. So that doesn't work. So he is kind of subjecting it to these very human kind of demands at that point, because, you know, my cat does not question his sense certainty. He's kind of, I think sometimes he does, but maybe cats are a little special. But yeah, I think there's definitely levels going on there. Okay, speaking of animals, I just feel like talking about this kind of, but yeah, there's some animals that are pretty intelligent. I think dogs and cats, but so there's also the mirror recognition kind of test that seems to be a kind of test about self-awareness, or I guess you would call it that, yeah. Or, you know, for those who don't know, I'm probably just saying this, you know, you guys know, but okay, if you they get this, I don't know, a chimpanzee or something to stand in front of a mirror, they put a dot or something on its head. If you connect the image in the mirror with itself and be like, oh, what the hell, I've got a dot in my head, then that shows a kind of self-awareness that it can think or know that the object out there is itself, in some degree. So that seems to be that, you know, this mirroring effect, I think, is kind of significant as well. Let's not get into Lacan there, but yeah, I think that's kind of what's going on with the idea of self-consciousness, and also why it would need something kind of like a double as well. But you see that how that's kind of strange how that comes about, because okay, in order to, it didn't need the mirror in order to be self-conscious, or, you know, no, it would have had to have been self-consciousness in a sense, in some way, at least implicitly, before, and then eventually it learned through, I don't know, interacting with other monkeys, and just, I don't know. I don't really know where I'm going with this, so I'm just gonna leave it there.
Well, it is kind of, I think, going back to what you said and to what Nevitt said, what I got from this reading or what I'm struggling with myself, is that he's trying to link self-consciousness with desire. And in order to have something be self-conscious, it needs another self-conscious for it to not just be for itself. So desire has some role in that, but desire needs to be focused, and when I read him, on something that is conscious. So that I think he's trying to make a demarcation of saying, hey, these are the unconscious things that exist that have certainty in my kind of transcendental idealism, and these things are self-conscious, and these are the things we need in this demarcation point, almost, that still have this flux relationship. We need these other consciousness to have desire, which perpetuates into his ethics.
Yeah, I think that that does make sense. So I know when he first starts talking about desire as this basic animal desire, that it's about just kind of dumb objects. But that's something that, because it just simply consumes those things, it doesn't give it the certainty that it actually requires. And that's what leads towards the needing of a self-consciousness in order to justify its own certainty of itself, of its existence. So yeah, that makes sense to me. Although I'd say that, yeah, it starts off where it is desire of just these objects, but then it's like, oh, well, that doesn't really work, you know? I think it's the same thing kind of with, say, an example, technology. You're trying to get some kind of representation of something. The way that it always kind of eludes being the real thing, and it keeps moving towards what, from some kind of, okay, first I've got, you know, first it's writing, you've got, oh, I can kind of, that's kind of like reproducing, you know, the presence of someone. That's maybe what they would say or something. And then you get, oh, I can hear a recording of them. I can hear their voice, but you know, it's not the same, because I can't really see them while they're speaking. So that's part of the whole thing, you know. And then eventually you get TV, like, oh, well, I can't touch them. I can see them, I can hear them, I can't really touch them, and so on and so forth. So it keeps going towards this thing where the object I would needs to be something that's fully present as a kind of subjectivity. And I think that's, so it relates in other ways for Hegel other than that, but I think that's kind of just one example of the way that desire kind of moves in that direction towards needing some other self-consciousness from something that was originally not conscious at all. Maybe, I'm not sure about that, but yeah.
That's a good point. Let me write that down before I forget that. Desire and the unconscious being, or I'm going to forget that.
So we're seeing that in that first section, right? With pleasure and necessity, this kind of shift to, like, I want to be verified by another.
Yeah, where he talking about the immediate unity of the individual heart and the other. Yeah, I mean, that's at least how I interpreted it.
Yeah.
The 373, 375. Oh, did I skip ahead too far? I might have skipped ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. You're good.
I do like this new reading schedule, though, by the way. This really, like, even just the small one is hard to comprehend. So this one really lets us kind of delve in a little bit more tidbits. So thank you again, Chase.
I feel like
So-
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I feel like my frustrations at the beginning and my, again, yammering on about that, you know, really sent the conversation off. I mean, it's been helpful, I think, for me anyway, but I apologize if that diverted us too far away from, you know, the current material that we're working on, if you guys want to get back to that.
No, I felt like it related quite a bit, actually.
I thought it helped.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of what Joey was talking about, is like, you know, to understand what's going on in pleasure and necessity is, in a way, to have an understanding of what's going on in sense certainty and in the understanding and in reason and yada yada yada. There is at least this I think this is kind of what he's trying to impart, if anything, in terms of like a I mean, and not only all of his findings. I think that Hegel kind of positions himself sort of like this dialectical researcher of the world, this dialectical analyst, researcher, and theorist, right? And this professor in a way. And he's here to kind of tell us what he's found and what he's encountered and what he's theorized up to that point. And I think that what we are supposed to take away from this is not necessarily something that I think a lot of people feel like he's doing, which is making a series of dogmatic statements. Like Nevitt, you said, like, it seems like he's doing that, and I agree. It sucks. It's like it definitely is. Like, it seems he's just kind of saying these kind of bold, flat claims about the nature of things. But to me, I guess, it seems like the point is not the findings of his yes, and I get that. It's not that the findings of his claims support these broad, consistent, structural statements about reality necessarily, but that there is a method of analysis going on that produces these findings and responds to deadlocks within experience, like contradictions, deadlocks, antagonisms, impasses, materialism versus formalism, mind and matter, antinomies, stuff like that. And it responds to them in a way that puts us into a set of constructive coordinates, or actually, to borrow from like Walter Benjamin, he calls them constellations, to orient our project. And this is a statement from Hegel, from what we've read already: absolute liberation. And another, what the Ljubljanian modern guys like to call it, is universal emancipation. But if one is orienting a project around something like absolute liberation or universal emancipation, and in the hope of doing so is looking to fashion a semi-consistent rational system to understand their experience, they're out of luck. Like, that's not going to happen. But the best they can get is this. Like, this is this is a good second. This is like a good set of tools for analysis. And that's why I think he approaches sense certainty, and he gets this kind of like, okay, basically, I think that he could reapproach sense certainty and find new terms going on to work with within the problem of developing an understanding of the shapes of sense certainty and the development that those shapes kind of lead into. I think that in doing that, the way that he did it here in the Phenomenology of Spirit is not the only possible way to do it. I think that it's not that closed. I don't think that it's dealing, and this is kind of what Chase and I were talking about, is the difference between like a restricted economy and a general economy, which is George Bataille. His theory, and I guess I could, yeah, I don't know actually where, but I know I very recently read somebody talking for quite a while. Was it Schelling?
Yes, it's in the Schelling introduction, The Age of the World. I just reread that yesterday.
Okay, what's the difference between a restricted and a general economy? Do you know off the top of your head then?
So the general economy, okay, so the restricted economy is the one I think I understand more, is basically it has this finite amount of things, resources that it can partition out, and that it has to kind of make sense of things coming in from the outside in terms of some kind of precondition of what it's already has. So it has to think in terms of exchange, that it can only produce something by taking in something. So it's kind of operating on that kind of exchange sort of model, where the general economy is something that is a kind of pure expenditure. It has no concern about taking in something or expelling something. It doesn't need to be equal in any way. But yeah, that's okay. So the one thing, it seems like Hegel is saying that this is it necessarily does have to be kind of done like this. I kind of see where there could be kind of different avenues in possibly, but he seems to kind of hate anything that's indeterminate. You know, it's always, how do I make this determinate? How do I make it where it's not just some contingent, you know, thing like, oh, whenever I go to the market, it rains, you know. He needs it to be something that's very explicit and determinate. And that's where I think he's saying, you know, that on some level, the dialectic unfolds in this kind of necessary manner. But, you know, how exactly that even relates to whatever reality, I'm not sure. Because, you know, it's not something he's not talking about some, you know, just simple historical actuality or something like that. So, and, you know, this isn't something that anyone is actually thinking themselves other than Hegel when he wrote this book, basically. But you know what I'm saying? I'm not like completely dismissing it, but there definitely needs to be some kind of necessary connection with this. That's why it's a logic. But yeah.
And yeah, and he says, you know, doesn't he say that, you know, he's frustrated with prior system builders who start with presuppositions and axioms and then develop, you know, develop deductively from that, because it's all grounded on these assumptions, and you can always question the assumptions. But he says this is an internal development, right? That you're not looking at external presuppositions and axioms. You're looking at the way things happen and the way they develop internally on their own. And so I think, you know, like you said, I don't know what degree of necessity that has, but it does seem to require, he wants something that has its own, or he wants to show how this stuff develops from its own internal logic without having to reach outside of itself.
Yes, and I think that he starts I guess my point is that he starts the book from like and this is a point that Joey just made in the chat, is a supposed given. Is like, you know, he's like, it seems like there is at least some degree to which the outset of the project is like it seems like the general tone of the project is to create a science of logic, is to outline a basic science of logic. But which he tries to do with this book, like to empty out all categories and do this big illumination of spirit, you know, and then we can make the logic of the science of logic in the next book, you know, we can figure that out. But here it's like this supposed given is where he starts. He's like, okay, well, we got to know something. We got to know a thing. I know things. I feel like I generally know things. Most people that I talk to say that they know a thing or two. Let's start with a thing. Okay, how do I know if I know a thing? What's my tools? And then he's like, all right. And I think in that sense, it's like he could would it, this is kind of in response to like Nevitt when you were asking about like the self-consciousness thing. Really, it's like he could have started the book like at self-consciousness, for example. Like he could have theoretically just not written all that other stuff, or maybe made put that in a different text or something. But I think that for the sake of developing a thoroughgoing logic that begins at a place where he can point out its foundation as being one that does not, in his eyes, it does not suffer the same problems that other systems do based on their reliance on external presuppositions. He has to start it somewhere to where he can say, this is why it doesn't fall into that category. This is why what I'm doing, I'm really trying to not make this same mistake, rather than just kind of start later on where it's more perhaps relatable or cogent, or like this is something that Travis was talking about, a little bit more, I guess, observable within present reality or lived experience. You know, like I think he's starting at a particular place to cross all of his T's and dot his I's. You know, in a way, in a sense. But yeah, and I read this thing by Rebecca, that book, The Dash, by Rebecca Comey and Frank Bruda. They talk about his presuppositionless beginning. And actually, Catherine Malibu says that was Deleuze's biggest critique of Hegel, was his beginning, the beginning of the dialectic, actually. And in fact, here, just to shit on Hegel a little bit, hold on, I wrote it down. I remember, yes. So Deleuze feels like Hegel's logic may have some sense of multiplicity, but it is still bad taste in philosophy. It is still engaging in bad taste, and it simplifies concepts down to simple opinion, false perceptions, illusions of universality, and supposedly higher knowledge. And he says that dialectics never account for its own presuppositions or origins. And he questions, does the complementarity of terms come from an originary no or a limitless yes? And dialectics fundamentally cannot answer this and is therefore just a quote unquote simple procedure. Which I think is pretty cool. I like that stuff. That's kind of cool.
So in that video, it's an actual lecture course that Deleuze is giving, and one of the things he says is that from the very beginning, the sincerity part, by talking about the indexical this pronoun, you know, a demonstrative pronoun, this or that, he says that he improperly takes an indexical pronoun and treats it like a general kind of noun class, or I'm not sure the technical terms, but the way you would talk about a pig as this kind of Aristotelian kind of, oh, a pig is this kind of general concept of, you know, there's lots of pigs. They could be any pig, you know, doesn't have to refer to this pig. He's saying that that's exactly what the this is not doing. It's not supposed to be this that is universal. So that's kind of what he focuses on there. But yeah, that presupposition thing in the beginnings, yeah, that's definitely what he does not like. And I know at the so for those who care, the chapter on the image of thought in this, he opens it by talking about the problem of beginnings. And I think he goes into exactly what's wrong with Hegel's thing there, but I didn't get to that part. I read the part where he talks about it in terms of Descartes, and I think he says something about you know, people, Hegel criticized Descartes, but to some degree, he is kind of doing something similar, and that he has these implicit presuppositions that he just hasn't made explicit. And I think he says instead you should just kind of have explicit presuppositions and just kind of lay those out and be like, it's like Spinoza. He's like, I'm presupposing these things. Here they are. What can I do with this? You know, and not that Deleuze isn't saying you have to use, you know, axioms and stuff like that, like Spinoza, but I think that's kind of what he's saying in terms of presuppositions, but I'm kind of extrapolating out what I think he's arguing based off of having read like 3 pages of that chapter. So I just realized I totally got sidetracked by, how did we start talking about Deleuze? I don't, whatever.
Joey, what do you mean by backtracking across necessary presuppositions?
I guess like and I hesitate to use like he's saying that it's like a transcendental deduction type thing, but at least like the way Bernstein was phrasing it is he was saying like Hegel wasn't claiming to like start from like a presupposition to spot, but he just like starts with like a common everyday example, like this book is real, or like this is real, and then from there he like has to unfold the thought or like everything that goes in for us to be able to like say with any assurance that like this is real. And like naturally that's going to like unfold, you know, like we were talking about earlier, how it like goes into self-consciousness, and how we were saying like, well, how can we like say something about an object before self-consciousness? And I think the fact that self-consciousness comes after is because I think like it's, if we want to be able to say like this book is a book, it's going to ride initially on like we've already unfolded this process of self-consciousness. It's like he's really going backwards. And I think like, I mean, I get that sense too. I feel like Hegel's said it too, that like he's uncovering like the implicit assumptions like in each shape, and each of those implicit things are like what gives rise to the next shape.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think he's obviously not necessarily saying that, you know, the sense certainty thing is his presupposition. I think instead he's saying kind of the exact opposite, that there are all these just baked in presuppositions in sense certainty that don't work. And then, but then the thing that's presuppositionless that he's saying is the method of kind of unwinding it, because that is just kind of inherent in the sense certainty, in the failure of it, I guess, really. That in its failure, and it has this kind of inner unfolding, and that's what he's saying. He's just kind of helping it along. Whether that really works, I'm not totally sure, because I mean, you know, a lot of people have sense certainty, failure of it, but they don't write the phenomenology of the spirit. So I don't know. It seems like there's still a presupposition that that's exactly how you go about unfolding those presuppositions and whatnot. But to try to just simply understand what Hegel is even arguing, I think that it's something basically like what Joey already said, and then I just kind of reiterated, because I'm a narcissist.
What that reminds me of is, you know, Hunter's talk about failure, the method, and I don't know how well they're linked, but so it sounds like what you guys are saying is that each dialectical move is precipitated by the failure of the previous one. And so, you know, like you say, if you assume sense certainty gives you truth, then boom, this thing fails because of that. And then the next thing you can assume is this, but then that fails because of that. So I guess I'm wondering, is that is that what you mean? And is that what Hunter means by this constant failure? And also, is this notion of failure related to this notion of the negative? Because that's another thing I don't really understand, is the negative principle, or this method of negation. What he means by that, is that related to this constant process of failure?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely where he's going with that. That okay, self-consciousness is this kind of negation, and that's the self-consciousness is what is looking at those things and saying this doesn't work. And I think that's why he'd be saying that, okay, that's why my pet cat does not move beyond sense certainty, because he doesn't have this kind of ability to negate those presuppositions by bringing them out into this kind of reflexive, projection, and this kind of logical space where you would see that, oh, it doesn't work, and then it moves on. So I think there's that connection with that, this labor of the negative that moves the dialectic, that's connected with consciousness, or I think specifically self-consciousness, but then that goes into, okay, then do you have to have self-consciousness immediately in order to move beyond sense certainty? It seems like that to me. It seems like you have to do that, otherwise, why is my cat not Hegel? Maybe he is, I don't know. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But there's also this whole aspect of, in a sense, you could say, because all these things are failing, that everything he says is basically not really serious, in that you can't just take it, like take a random sentence and just be like, oh, Hegel says that first immediate pure unity as such and is a singular individual, and just be like, there it is, that's it. It has to be, put into the whole movement. But then the thing is this, okay, in order for that to work, he still has areas where this is the voice of, Hegel as absolute knowing, looking back at the whole process, is moving it along. There's times where he's like, oh, see how this contradicts this? And even for us, for us phenomenologists, for us who have achieved absolute knowing, if you've read my Science of Logic, you would know this, of course, for us, great philosophers, or no, we're not philosophers, we're, we've actually achieved knowledge. We don't just love knowledge, we have, we're there. We see that, really this law of the heart guy is just dumb. He's just doesn't know what he's doing, he's caught up in his thing, whatever, he's self-deception. But we see that this is going to move in this way because this contradicts this. So in ways, it still is Hegel, like talking about this stuff. He's like, yeah, you see there, this does that. But then when you take a lot of the content, he's just kind of like doing Deleuze, like this method of dramatization. He's kind of putting these things into play and be like, oh, look at these ideas moving about. Oh my goodness, they're contradicting each other. But then the contradictions lead to these flips and, all these inversions and stuff. So I think that's kind of what he's saying. I don't know if that helps at all, because honestly, there's parts of this where it's like, I'm not sure if I just don't understand it, or if there's something wrong with it, or some kind of, or both, or neither. I'm not even sure. But
Chase, when you were talking and then connected to what Joey was typing, let me play with something. If Hegel is if Hegel is showing the limitations of different kinds of arguments and different kinds of chains of logic, that it just struck me that that's maybe what his goal is. I'm going to show you how the different ways that one can try to get a handle on knowing consciousness hits brick walls. All right. And if he does it enough, if he shows the limitations of human reason sufficiently again and again and again and again, right? Well, we'll go down this path. Well, that won't work. We'll go down this path. That won't work. Isn't he then, by all these examples, potentially saying we can't, little k, know something only through reason? I mean, unless we're all catatonic and we're actually in some tube, we are experiencing the world and we are a part of it. So if all of the different ways that we're trying to rationally understand it are failing, then we're going to have to embrace something else.
Yeah, I want to push back against that, just from like
sure, go ahead.
I'm just thinking of just rational is what's rational is actual, and thinking about, I feel like maybe like we see contradiction arising in this like movement, but I guess like speaking back to the whole like Kant's antinomies, and Kant's using the antinomies as a reason like not to give all the power to reason. And I think Hegel wants to like show us maybe almost just like the power of these contradictions, and like these contradictions are like what are like allowing us to move into the next phase. So it's not just like these stages are failing, and like, oh, every single stage is going to fail, like what are we going to do? I think it seems like he wants to make the argument, and I guess can't really tell exactly where he's going just yet, but I feel like he wants to make the argument that like this process of failure is giving rise to new things. Like there's the idea of determinate negation, like something positive is coming out of this. It's not necessarily we have to like drop the project of reason in general, but just
is that, I guess that kind of, and forgive me for coming back and immediately jumping in and talking, but that kind of leads into the one topic I wanted to discuss before ending the session, in 352 and 353, where he talks about a free nation, and reason is in truth realized. And the part that really struck me, where he starts talking about the wisest men of antiquity have therefore declared that wisdom and virtue consists in living in accordance with the customs of one's nation. And that's what I think goes into what Joey is saying as well, is that there is a limit to reason, but in this dialectical process of kind of discovering what the wisdom or the virtue is at the time, I'm wondering how much of Hegel at this point influenced or played a role in what could be considered like kind of amoralism or nihilism, or if it was even influential on like a Nietzschean aspect, in that this virtue or this wisdom of the time that reason is discovering, rediscovering, and producing in each culture's, spirit of the age, leads to more of this definition of what is good, and then it kind of has a dialectical process and then redefines itself.
I know that Nietzsche would say that it's contributing to nihilism, definitely. But then he says that about Christianity itself, and he says it about Socrates as well. So a lot of things definitely are. But yeah, I think if you look at where he's getting at by being able to, so part of the thing, he was actually kind of trying to push back on some of that, because he talks about there was this kind of a romantic movement slightly before Hegel in the 18th century, and that was a kind of a destructive kind of thing, where it was very much going against established practices, customs, laws, whatever. And I think that's something that he thought that yeah, you can't just simply destroy everything. Even sublation is a kind of usually some kind of a partial canceling of something, but also a partial taking up of something and carrying it forward. So I think that's what it literally aufgeheben or whatever. I think it literally means something like picking up, like carrying something. So I know that he critiques that pure negative thing, but did that still contribute to a certain sense? Because people, and this is the kind of thing that a lot of modern kind of left Hegelians like Zizek will kind of focus on, is that kind of negative aspect of it. And I think that's definitely in Hegel, but he always wants to say that you can kind of there's still something positive to kind of come out of this. So yeah, it's kind of like what Ed and Joey were talking about. Yeah, it's kind of, we do hit these brick walls, but there's still something gained by seeing the brick wall, and then there's a kind of natural movement of logic is how it kind of bounces back off the brick wall in some other direction. That's kind of like what the dialectic is because it can't be a kind of random movement, from one wall to the other. Every point has to be connected in some way that makes sense internally to its own movement. And I think that's where he gets something out of it eventually. Some kind of positive knowledge claim is eventually reached.
And I'm trying to find it, and maybe Hunter can tell me in less than nothing, where it almost seems like Zizek has a very similar concept in that dialectical process playing a role in values being defined in the age. And yes, there is a process, and yes, there is a goal, but I think he's trying to deviate from the traditional role or reading of Hegel and his materialism and the spirit having a purpose, and in that there is no purpose. It's just a byproduct of its function, almost kind of like that's just how it is, but it doesn't have an ultimate goal or end in history. I can't remember where I read something similar to that in less than nothing, but I have too many notes on different Hegelian sources.
I
think maybe Hunter would have to comment on that.
I was going to add, because in this class that Hunter and I were in last fall or spring, we had a lot of dialogue between Nietzsche and Hegel, and so I was going to try to express what Hunter was saying, but since he's been kind of quiet, but I would rather him just talk about that. But because my sense was, when Hunter would say things like that from a Hegelian perspective, even though your values are historically conditioned, they still have real normative force, rather than Nietzsche saying, well, because they're historically conditioned, there really is no morality. But I don't know if Hunter wants to speak to that.
Okay, a few things. First off, does Hegel have a system of failures? Yes, I'm just going to respond to a bunch of stuff all at once for the past 10 minutes. Okay, does Hegel have a system of failures? Yes, I think so. I think it's not a smooth, logical machine that can have interchangeable parts, but a chain of failures and blockades where the position of the subject enunciating the dialectical process or the analyst analyzing is trying to reverse defeat by stepping back and changing coordinates in order to enter into a new constellation. So like this is the kind of the structure that I think is going on in Hegel's epistemological system and in his conception of reality itself. And this is, okay, so you said, is dialectics an internal thing? Is dialectics internal? Like, I'd say yes. And it's not necessarily, well, first off, two things I want to say about the internal thing. A rose is a rose. There's a space right there for dialectics to happen. That's kind of just half a joke. Never mind. So dialectics is like the coincidence of opposites, not the eternal struggle of opposites. I want to kind of just emphasize this before we close out today, that it's not like him summoning up concepts in, like he has a flat field in front of him and he's like plucking up positive entities up out of the field, just saying, look at these two. What happens when we have two things in opposition against each other. It's not the eternal struggle of like of substantial opposite entities, like two billiard balls basically, that produces reality, you know, like masculine and feminine, or light and dark, or good and evil, or fire and water, or something. But it's like a twisted or convoluted sort of space where, like a line, if I were to try to draw a line into it at its extreme, it would coincide back with its opposite. It would be perpendicular. If I just tried to go straight, it would start to intersect with itself eventually. The ultimate kind of gesture of an idea is its breakdown, or its failure, or its extreme, which looks like its opposite, you know, looks and smells and acts like an opposite. So, okay, where does this failure come into play? This is present here. First off, yeah, eternal contingent. Yeah, okay, that's good. I'll try and remember that. Okay, so to fail eternally. I think that this failure is potentially good for us in a certain way, in the sense that limitation and mortality, limitation and mortality and negativity. Abstract negativity is a character of things in Hegel. I think that abstract negativity is while yes, there is a positive element to things, I think that a good name for that positive element of things would be like the indivisible remainder that Schelling talked about. It's this aspect of, so everything can be overcome, right? I think that in Hegel, there is also this, and this is where I think a lot of those negative Hegelians, like Adorno and stuff, they get their fuel, is this rule. It's like, well, okay, mister, we can break every rule. What about the rule that we can break every rule? Couldn't there be something that is never sublated? And I think that that's a thing that, like, yes, there's an indivisible remainder, and that indivisible remainder, that thing that negates its own negation, that is what we have. That's like a positive. It's like this little grain of sand left in the machine, and it's like the seat, I think, of like liberatory action and stuff like that. But okay, to fail eternally, limitation and, you know, mortality, failure are negativity. There's things are buffeted by abstract negativity and are abbreviated by negativity. You know, this is where Hegel critiques infinite perfect multiplicities. He says, like, look, this infinite multiplicity is going to suffer from negativity of some kind. You know, hunger, failure, stupidity, greed, laziness, age, whatever. There's some sort of negativity, and this negativity, a thing would find theoretically, a thing would find, and this is where I think Hegel actually gets close to Nietzsche again, in a way, just in kind of the message of what he's saying a little bit, is that a thing would find peace or completion when it like successfully fits into its finite contours, and like is like, I am now an immortal human that can dump my brain onto a computer or something, right? But I think that the starting with that concept of the you know, the split between a thing and itself and the failure of the predicate, starting kind of there, or around there, really, it can never really accomplish its absolute fulfillment. I can never be the perfect hunter, you know, or the perfect son or brother or whatever. I can never fill my finite contours or live in accordance with nature. I can never really live in accordance with nature, and therefore I can persist. I can persist in my striving. And Lacan, and all these, you know, psychoanalysts, you know, guys would say that they could persist beyond death, like Hamlet's father being a ghost, kind of due to the gap between his physical death and his symbolic death. Hamlet's ghost dad was not yet ready to die, and he was like, I need to hang around for a little bit longer in order to symbolically die with my son, whom I want him to have my skull or whatever, and that is important to my symbolic death, and I have to stick around to make that happen. He can persist beyond death because of his not yet complete symbolic death. So it's not that there's there's like a substantial, imminent, already present positivity that is like growing like a flower. It's that the negation of negation is a positivity. Like it's not necessarily that there's this to me, it's not necessarily like there's this unstoppable will of positivity that will always reign true, but that like even negation fails and breaks, even the breaking breaks. And so we fail to succeed as much as we fail to fail. And this is kind of a critique of like Marx almost, is right. Is like I can't really be as successful socially as I want to be, and I can never really fail socially as much as I want to be, because I don't quite have what I want. I'm never going to be socially satisfied, but at the same time, I can't just look at my life and say I have nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose, and I can throw everything away for the sake of a revolution because I have nothing to lose but my chains. I have nothing to lose but my chains. I can never totally say that because I have something to lose. I have friends and people I love, and my negation failed, even my constant negative. And so this negation of negation, I think, is the seat of positivity. And I think that it's where I've been coming from, when I've said before that I think that like a big theme of saying the like absolute knowledge thing is to close the game, basically, is to say that nothing that we can think, nothing, and then in parentheses, that we can think can happen anymore. Although time will go on. No, the world will never be halted by any system, basically, is like a big lesson here. Is like a big thing to me, is that the world will never be halted, and that we can end the game and the game can go on, because man can be perfectly tabulated by a physiognomist and with a day's effort can be completely incomprehensible for another 100 years. I think that there's this negativity that can found its own positivity, and that negativity is the basis of a system of failure that allows for persistence and for our most magnificent accomplishments, like a developed language and technology and a society, a society that is characterized by a barbarism at its core. Social orders, any ethical edifice that we could possibly conceive of, has barbarism at its core. This is the line just going to its own extreme and breaking itself. And just to explain that, is that the ethical life of a society is founded on some sort of ethical edifice, right? But that ethical edifice, and this means two people, imagine just two people or groups of two people, a million groups of two people all kind of get together like, we have a little ethical society, yes. So, yes. So just for hyperbole's sake. So the highest ethical act of any ethical edifice is to, and this is what he's talking about with virtue. This is today. This was all today. Is like, and this is what I got from today, is to do this self-sacrifice thing for the sake of the ethical edifice that you support in the face of its destruction at the hands of a different ethical edifice that you disagree with and you find to be unethical. The highest ethical act is self-sacrifice for the preservation of these ethics. And so we can't achieve something like the expansion of universal peace by law because there's this necessary sort of barbarism at the core of ethics that sustains any ethical edifice of a civilization. And so support for an ethical edifice is in a way a support for barbarism in its support of it being itself, as opposed to a different ethical edifice that may come threaten it and needs to be supported as an ethical edifice being a thing that joins people together. And yeah, so, that's a problem. But that's negativity. That's negativity. That's an example of like abstract negativity just being at the core of the apple. It's at the rotten core of the apple. But at the same time, that negativity is the reason that if I draw the line on reality, it will become its opposite after a while. It'll become its opposite. And the shape that that a lot of people kind of see as being born out of this, if we want to talk about terms, is like a Mobius strip. but that's weird and would take a lot more talking. But yeah, that's my thoughts on negativity and the system of failures and it being internal because it's in a convoluted space, and positivity and civilization. That's it.
No, that was helpful. Thank you. Very.
Okay. So before I forget, I need to say we have an audience on YouTube now.
Oh,
There's someone
yay.
that actually
Yay.
commented and said they were following the series and they wanted to join the Discord. I sent them the link. They're on the Discord now and they're interested in possibly joining in later. So someone might actually watch this recording, apparently.
Ah,
Isn't that incredible?
that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's neato.
Yeah. So shout out to our audience. Rose tinted glasses, I think that was the screen name. Anyways, yeah, so that's cool. They may come join us later. But oh, and the other thing I was gonna ask, Hunter, where's Travis? Where is he?
Oh, yeah.
He was picking up his PS5 and then he went to the apartment to go
Oh.
pick up stuff like stuff for his cat Coco, who's living with us now. It's very exciting. I heard him actually come in, I think, at some point, and I intended to go throw this list of potential groceries and food items to buy right at him and not mention this seminar at all, because I know that he doesn't care about what I am interested in. He doesn't care for my interests and my passions. He's just doing this kind of to make me happy. I get that, you know, as evinced by his behavior today, and just I could kind of say that because he's not here, you know.
Okay, okay, so the literature thing, Nev and I showed up and no one else was there. We're just kind of like,
I literally thought it. I'm sorry.
So it's,
You guys suck.
yeah, I just haven't heard anything. So I don't know. At least I know he's okay, so that's good.
I just played hooky, and then I looked in this. I played because I hadn't read, and then it was 6 p.m. and I was like, I'm going to read now, and then I did. I was reading. I was very peaceful. It was lovely. And I looked at the Discord and I saw nobody was in the channel. I was like, oh my God, what happened? And I texted Travis. I was like, are you not in the Discord? And he was like, oh, I had to do stuff. And then I texted Jackson. I was like,
That's a good Travis impression.
yeah, I was like, Jackson, are you not in the Discord? He said, oh, I had to do stuff. And we were all like, oh my God, did we all just silently not go today? Oh no.
We were there out of like 35 minutes, something.
Yeah. Yeah, we were there for like 35 minutes and then we're like, well, hell.
Yeah.
Jason's like, well, I got stuff to do anyway, so.
Still do.
Yeah. So we have just whatever the woman, Penelope, or I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just 2 more left. Something that I have dropped the ball on that I need to start annoying you guys about again is what days to have seminars in the fall. So I'll start, which is going to be important for this group because since we're going all the way into October, so I'll start bugging you guys about that again. So any final comments? Okay, well, thanks. It was very, very helpful comments for me personally tonight, so I appreciate that. Okay, see you next time.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
All right.